Okay, so in your notes, you want to be at this spot to go through and take some notes. If you need to get your notes out, pause the video so that way you can fill these in as we're going through um, the notes. Okay, so yesterday we talked about what's happening at ridges. Ridges are also called um, divergent plate boundaries or seafloor spreading because the crust is moving away from each other. What we're going to talk about today is what's going on at these trenches. So at these places right here, what's going on in those spaces. So we can see that one of the plates is going under, but we're going to get a little better idea of kind of what's going on in those places. There it goes. So when you go through and look at trenches, so trenches are some of the deepest places in the ocean floor. And they're like these channels. So you can see each of these three pictures is kind of showing what they look like. This really, really deep space. This really, really deep space right above where it says stop sharing or kind of right next to it, that's a trench. It's like the deepest places in the ocean are these trenches. So you can see a couple pictures of kind of what's going on. And then the top one, it actually shows an arrow of what a trench or where a trench would be. But these trenches are formed because two plates are going towards each other, and one of those plates is being taken underneath. So you can see that in that top right picture. Plates are going to go under, and the one that's going to go under is always going to be more dense. If you think about an ocean and continental crust coming after each other, we know ocean crust is made up of basalt, and we know that basalt is more dense than continental crust because that's what we talked about a couple weeks ago. So ocean crust will always go underneath or be taken under continental crust. When you look at two oceans, because sometimes there's plates where it's two ocean crusts that are colliding or coming towards each other. And in that case, the colder and older one is going to go underneath. So the colder, just like in the convection lab, if something's colder, it's more dense, it's going to sink. Same thing here. The ocean crust that's colder, more dense, it's also always going to be the older one is going to be the one that sinks down. So here's some pictures of the ocean, and the top one is an ocean-ocean collision. You can see the one that's going down would be the older, colder, and then you can see the ocean-continent one. So here are all the different places around the world where we see trenches. Just like we had other names for ridges, we have other names for trenches as well. Trenches are places that are called subduction zones because one is being subducted or taken underneath another. And these are also called convergent plate boundaries because the boundaries are coming towards each other or they're kind of running into each other. Trenches or things that are found at these subduction zones are obviously the trenches. Those are those deep channels where you can see that arrow. We're also going to see earthquakes because, again, the main thing that's going to happen because these two plates are rubbing against each other is that we're going to have all these earthquakes that are occurring. We're also going to see some volcanoes, and that's not at the actual boundary. It's a little more inland, and we'll go back and look at a picture of what that is or where they're going to happen. But you can also see tsunamis. That TS word is actually pronounced tsunami, and because of earthquakes occurring underwater, a tsunami, like that energy can go up into the water, and it actually forms a tsunami, which is a really, really big wave. So here are those two pictures I wanted to go back and look at to show you those volcanic islands. Let me grab the pen. So if you look, this plate is going underneath, so it's being subducted. And as it gets really deep, we know that this down here is hotter than what the surface is. So at some point, this is going to start to melt. And as this starts to melt, it's going to rise to the surface and it's going to form a volcano that's going to be there. And it's usually called a volcanic, if it's ocean, it's an island arc because these volcanoes are shooting up into an island that's there. Same thing is going to happen for the continent. When that ocean plate is taken underneath, it's going to go through and melt because it's hotter down there. That magma is going to come to the surface and it's going to form volcanoes, but these volcanoes are just on land because this is a continent crust where this was an oceanic crust. So we got islands versus volcanoes on like land. Okay, so two of these places around the world, or two trenches around the world, one's the Japan Plate and the other one is the Mariana Trench. So there's two little videos I want you to go through and watch. They'll pop up in the notes to links and you can go through and watch them in a hot second. But take it a second to go through and look at these places and get an idea of kind of what's going on at these places. You can also see if we go back, I don't think I put it in there, but if we go back and look at our topography, and of course it's kind of tilted, but if we go back and look at, so the Mariana Trench, you can see over here. So if you look right here, you can see there's some purple and pink there. That's the trench because you can see that the purpley pink color, that's some of the deepest places on the earth. And that's actually where the trench is. You can follow that line right along there. And you can see that there's some trenches that are there. If you looked at the, why is my computer running so slow? If you look at the earthquakes, those trenches, or over by the Mariana Trench and the Japan Trench, you can see a whole bunch of earthquakes that are happening here. So you can see all along this space right here. That's the Mariana Trench. You can also see that there's a whole bunch of earthquakes happening along the North and South America, and that's because there's also a trench that's going there because this plate is going towards North America and they're colliding with each other. So that's why we see that. Where over in the Mariana Trench, we actually have two ocean plates coming together. So if you actually look at this place, you can actually see that there's an island arc that's there or some islands that are there because that stuff is melting and kind of going back. The last thing is we talked about what happens if an ocean plate comes together or collides. We talked about ocean versus continent, but sometimes you can actually have two continental crusts collide. And when that happens, the continents just kind of all bunch together. One doesn't really go underneath each other. It's just basically like a head-on collision, and all that crust comes upwards and it creates a mountain. So there's the Himalayan mountains. That's one example of this continental collision. They're not necessarily moving any more towards each other at this moment, but that's how those mountains were formed in the past by those plates colliding and coming together. So based on this, you should be able to go through and finish all your questions in that note packet. If you need to go back, so you should be able to get to question 40. If you need to go back and look at something, go back, look at something, and then there's going to be some questions that pop up in a few minutes.